To get started without one of our speakers, but we have extreme confidence in the future and feel he'll show up before we, well in time to make his presentation. My name is Stapleton Roy. I'm associated with the Kissinger Institute on China and the United States here at the Wilson Center. As many of you know, the Wilson Center was created by Congress in the 1960s as a living memorial to the only American president who had a PhD and who brought together the world of public policy and scholarship in a unique way. And we are unique in another respect, which is we have bipartisan support in Congress, which is not a common feature of congressional behavior these days. The Kissinger Institute and the Asia program here at the Wilson Center have been doing a series of programs on the U.S. rebalance in East Asia, our rebalance strategy. We call it Weighing the Rebalance series. What used to be called the pivot strategy and has now been renamed the rebalance strategy, has raised numerous questions about what it is, what its intent is, what its goals are. These questions exist in the United States. They exist in East Asia. China sees it as a poorly disguised containment strategy. You find that view universally inside China. The United States does not think of it that way and does not define it that way. Rather, it is, and why it was called a pivot, is it's a public recognition in our policy that with China rising rapidly and the global center of gravity, if you will, shifting from west to east because of the rapid development of big developing countries such as China and India, the United States has to be certain that we are giving the region the attention that it deserved. It was named the pivot originally because everybody recognized that during the first decade of this millennium, we were heavily focused on the Middle East. And we were drawing down our presence at the Middle East at the time, and the intent was to show that we were not going to pull back into an isolationist mode, but in fact we were going to emphasize our interest in East Asia, in part because China's rapid rise was creating, if you will, both opportunities for its neighbors and anxiety on their part over how China would behave as a newly re-emerged major power in East Asia. Welcome. The Americans have been struggling with the question of defining what it is that we're doing under this rubric of the rebalancing strategy. But it's equally important to understand how Asians are viewing what we are doing. And there's an important reason for this, because China's rise has been quite different, for example, from the rise of the Soviet Union, if you will. It has conferred enormous benefits on the region because its economic growth has made it the principal trading partner of virtually all American allies and friends in East Asia, including both Singapore and Malaysia that we will be looking at today. But at the same time, China is becoming a increasingly powerful military country, and the question is whether its goal in East Asia is dominance or whether it is merely going to restore its position as a strong, prosperous country, which historically was its position in East Asia. Because of that, the countries in the region don't want to contain China, They don't want the United States to contain China. And if we adopted a containment strategy, we would have difficulty getting the regional support for it. But at the same time, all of the countries of East Asia recognize that they are not either individually or collectively strong enough to balance China. And therefore they want a country such as the United States that has historic interests in East Asia to demonstrate that we intend to remain engaged in East Asia. So in a sense, the test of our Asia policy, as viewed by Asian countries, is whether or not the United States is dealing with China in a way that enables them to continue to gain the benefits that they can accrue from China's rise without being threatened by a China that might wish to become a hegemonic power in East Asia. So these issues are all linked together. And we have earlier in our program series looked at Vietnam and the Philippines and Australia and Japan in terms of how they viewed the rebalance strategy. And today we are extremely fortunate to have two extraordinarily well-qualified professors with us today, Dr. Heng from American University and Dr. Liu, who's now the inaugural holder of the Lee Kuan Yew Chair at the Brookings Institution. Welcome, both of you. We will ask them to lead off with some remarks about how Malaysia and Singapore look at the U.S. rebalance strategy. Then we'll get into some questions and give and take. I may lead off with some questions, but then we'll open it to the audience and we can pursue the issue from there. So thank you. Dr. Heng, would you like to lead off?
Thank you. Is the mic on?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador Steve Roy. I'd like to thank the Kissinger Institute for inviting me to participate in this panel and speak on Malaysia's responses to U.S. balance in Asia. You're no doubt aware of the recent news reports highlighting the considerable political tensions in Malaysia. Some 100,000 Malaysians organized in Bersih 4 took the streets 10 days ago to demand electoral reforms and the resignation of Prime Minister Najib over alleged corruption pertaining to the 1MDB controversy. Despite the clamor for him to step down, it is clear that Najib is in no danger of losing his position, both as Prime Minister of Malaysia and President of UMNO, Malaysia's dominant political party. He remains well-positioned to welcome President Obama and other EAS leaders to the ASEAN and EAS summits in November. And these events are unlikely to be marred by any political crisis. Malaysia, I would agree completely with Ambassador Roy, that Malaysia does not regard the rebalance as a China containment policy. And Najib has proven to be a valued and appreciated partner of the US. He has broadly supported the rebalance policy and, importantly, has established a warm personal relationship with Obama. Under Najib's leadership, Malaysia-US bilateral ties are stronger than they have ever been under any other previous Malaysian leaders. The evidence can be seen in the broad range of subjects covered in the Malaysia-US Comprehensive Partnership signed during Obama's visit to Kuala Lumpur in April last year. The specifics of the rebalance objectives cover the so-called 3 Ds: defense, development, and democracy. I'll speak first about economic development and trade. In that area, Malaysia has made it clear that it wants to be part of the 12-country TPP agreement. Prime Minister Najib regards the TPP as a springboard that can catapult Malaysia from a middle-income country to an advanced income nation. This long-held national goal was first articulated back in 1991 by former Prime Minister Dr. Mahathir. Despite considerable domestic, political, and civil society opposition to the TPP, it appears that Najib will succeed in bringing the trade talks to a successful conclusion. In contrast, his predecessor, Abdullah Badawi's, had failed to push forward the bilateral Malaysia-US FTA. Although the TPP requires Najib to carry out politically difficult reforms associated with the country's pro-Malay, the Bumiputra affirmative action policies, by recognizing that Malaysia has a sovereign right to pursue such policies under TPP, the US has made it easier, much easier for Najib to sell the trade pact to both UMNO and Malay business leaders. Malaysia will gain from the TPP not just from expanded trade investments with the US, it also stands to benefit from China's economic response to the US rebalance. Malaysia was the first country in Southeast Asia to establish, in ASEAN, to establish diplomatic ties with Beijing. And under Beijing's AIIB and Maritime Silk Road Initiative, China is set to dramatically increase its Malaysia-bound investments. For example, it will co-fund the Malaysia-China Kuantan Industrial Park in Najib's home state of Pahang and the China-Malaysia Qinzhou Industrial Park in Guangxi province. China is also one of the 3 finalists in bidding for the first high-speed railroad between Kuala Lumpur and Singapore. In the defense realm, Najib has significantly strengthened military ties with the US, both as Prime Minister, but and also when he served as Malaysia's longest serving defense minister, an office he held from 1991 to 1995 and 2000 to 2008, where the strong fundamentals of the defense relationship were set. Reacting to China's naval vessels making unprecedented intrusions into Malaysia's claimed EEZ off the coast of Sabah and Sarawak, Malaysia has sought closer military ties with the US. It shares with the US common concerns over China's fast-paced land-building activities in the Spratly Islands and has actively cooperated with the US in conducting joint military training, naval exercises, hosting port visits for US naval vessels, and building up Malaysia's Marine Corps. As ASEAN chair, Malaysia is expected to produce a robust South China Sea statement, calling for all countries to abide by international law governing freedom of navigation, and for ASEAN and US and China to conclude the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea. At the same time, like all other ASEAN countries, Malaysia is careful, very careful, to keep security ties with China on an even keel and will refrain from pursuing military activities with the US that will arouse China's ire or directly threaten China's strategic interests in the region. Thus, any notion of a joint patrol of freedom of navigation in the disputed areas in the Spratly Islands will not be welcomed by Malaysia. Apart from sharing Washington's objective in maintaining peace and stability in the South China Sea, Malaysia also supports America's counterterrorism efforts in combating ISIL, both in the region and the Middle East. Counterterrorism cooperation is very robust, with Malaysia having prevented well over 100 jihadists from joining ISIL in Syria under its recently legislated Prevention of Terrorism Act. In the area of democracy and human rights, Malaysia has received less critical scrutiny under the Rebalance policy. The State Department's raising of Malaysia's country ranking in the 2015 TIP report from Tier 3 to Tier 2 watch list has made it possible for Malaysia to join the TPP by meeting the requirement put in place by Senator Menendez. Otherwise, Malaysia would have been disqualified from joining TPP as a Tier 3 country, and for that, Najib is profoundly grateful, because he is politically very committed to bring Malaysia into the TPP. Unlike the public scolding that US gave Malaysia for questionable human rights practices, especially under Mahathir's leadership, particularly for arresting and jailing the former Deputy Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, the US has refrained from publicly criticizing Najib when Anwar was incarcerated for the second time. US has also refrained from censoring Najib over the detention of opposition political leaders and civil rights activists in the last few months. The only area that the US continues to press Malaysia for improvement is in its treatment of refugees and foreign migrant workers. US reaction to the recent discovery of mass graves at the Malaysia-Thai border has also been decidedly muted. In short, the Nigel administration has actively embraced the US rebalance threat policy. Closer defense cooperation with Washington has given Malaysia a wider range of policy options to hedge against China's assertive activities in its claimed EEZ. Participation in the TPP, compared to the ASEAN Economic Community, which will be established at the end of this year, and the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership that ASEAN is leading. Now, participation in TPP is seen as Malaysia's best bet to become an advanced country. US muted response to sustained domestic criticisms of Najib's abuse of power has bolstered the legitimacy of his leadership in the region. With the Najib administration's treatment of Malaysia as a valued partner in the rebalance policy, Najib is unlikely to undermine US goodwill by harsh domestic persecution of opposition and civil rights leaders. His restraint was on display during the Birthday 4 mass rallies, where protesters were not subjected to the police intimidation, tear gas, and water cannon attacks, though these actions had accompanied previous mass rallies deemed illegal by the government. The Najib administration will continue to behave well, at least during the rest of its term as ASEAN chair, and Malaysia can also be expected to shape the ASEAN and EAS agenda and outcome in ways that will broadly advance US economic and strategic objectives in the region. At any event, compared to Malaysia's across-the-board support of the US rebalance, US expectations of Laos' performance as the next ASEAN chair will certainly be less rosy. Thank you.
Thank you for those very comprehensive remarks. Professor Liu?
Thank you, Ambassador Roy. It's a pleasure to be here. Sorry, I was a little bit late, post-Labor Day traffic. That's my excuse. Good morning, everyone. What I'm going to do is just to share some thoughts about some of the underlying issues as far as my reading of Singapore's concerns about the not just the pivot, but the state of US China relations, as well as the broader regional security agenda. I will move away from the statistics about how solid bilateral relations between the US and Singapore are. I think there's no gainsaying that it is a very comprehensive and very deep and long-standing relationship. I'll leave it at that. So let me start first with my sense of Singapore's view of the US-China relationship. It is quite obviously a very the most important bilateral relationship. It is locked in a very complex and complicated sort of a pattern of competition and cooperation. And of course, Singaporean leaders have no illusions that they can actually influence the trajectory of this relationship. But nevertheless, looking at it from a distance, I think the sense is that there are areas that can be improved on the cooperation side of things. And it is, I think, imperative that some sort of modus vivendi, if I may use Bilahari's favorite term, has to be found with regards to this bilateral relationship. How Singapore approaches this is, of course, strengthening bilateral relations with the US, as I alluded to earlier, but also with China. At the same time, ASEAN also plays a very important role in Singapore's sort of comprehensive strategy of engaging and as well as locking the interests of these major powers into the region. Now, as far as ASEAN is concerned, the underlying logic is, of course, architecture building, as analysts from the region like to call it. There are a couple of facets to that. The first is the issue of creating a range of institutions, functional, specific interest-driven, issue-driven, that can accommodate the various interested parties. Here I'm talking about institutions such as the EAS, the APT, now the ADMM, ASEAN Defence Ministers Meeting, ADMM Plus, etc. And these, I think, these multiple institutions serve to reflect a basic regional consensus on two fundamental realities. The first is a commitment to growth. Okay, the whole idea here is to create a situation that make countries at least hesitate before they take radical actions to prod, if I may put it that way, the regional consensus. And second underlying logic is that while the U.S. presence is fundamental, it is not on its own the sufficient. It's not on its own sufficient to anchor the regional architecture today. And certainly in that regard, this issue of seeing China play an active role, I think, is quite active and constructive role is quite important as well. However, for ASEAN to play this role, first and foremost, I think it must be able to resist the centrifugal forces generated by external forces, external developments. And to do this, two things has to happen. Number one, there needs to be substance, I think, to ASEAN's claim of coherence and centrality. And I think if you look at a number of issues today, for example, the South China Sea, you see tension there in that regard. And second, the individual states of ASEAN have to have the bandwidth for strategic and regional security affairs and not to turn insular or nationalist in perspectives. In their perspectives. And that allows me to segue into a third point, which is this this ASEAN, although people don't really talk about it today, but this ASEAN notion of national resilience, if I may, regional resilience stemming from national resilience, which I want to just revive for the sake of our discussion. And what I mean, basically, is the domestic challenges that a number of key ASEAN states face. And I think we cannot discount that, because if your assumption is that ASEAN is has always been driven by a number of key or more experienced, more established states, i.e. the founder states, then it follows that the propensity of some of these states to look inwards will have a detrimental effect for ASEAN. And if you look at what's happening in Malaysia, as Pek Kun very eloquently mapped out, we could go on that all day, right? But not just Malaysia. If you look at Thailand, definitely, in the years to come, even in the case of Indonesia, the nationalist impulse that we're starting to see in that country, all this might compromise attempts to build a stronger regional consensus, and that has to be watched. Let me move very quickly, and then we can open up for discussion, to some points that I listed out in terms of when I was thinking about this issue of looking ahead as far as US-Singapore relations is concerned. And I listed out 4 points. The first is Lee Kuan Yew. Why Lee Kuan Yew? My sense is that Singapore is a small country. Whatever we think or say, we're a small country, and our relevance, regardless of the punching above the weight analogy, our relevance in international affairs is limited. Nevertheless, amplified for some time in Washington circles by the late former Prime Minister. But he has passed on, and it would be interesting to see the amount of time that Washington leaders will have for their Singaporean counterparts from here on. That's number one. Number two, it is indeed a more complex security environment. I alluded to it earlier. I think State mentioned it as well, certainly compared to the Cold War. We are still trying to figure out how to have this U.S.-China accommodation. The U.S. and China are still trying to figure out how to work this out. There's a lot of thought, a lot of resources and energy going into that question in D.C., and I'm sure in the case of Beijing, same amount of energy devoted to that. Number 3 is the perennial issue of the sustainability of U.S. engagement. And here, let me caveat that by saying that it is not a case where the region doubts the commitment of the people in the policy community in D.C. That is not the issue. The issue is the politics that restrains them or constrains them. And we've seen that at work time and again. Unfortunately, I think more frequent in recent times than before. So it's not a question of us, the people from the region, not believing DOD or state officials when they say we will be committed. We have every reason to believe that they will. The question is whether they can muster the political consensus to support that commitment, which also means that if the coffers need to be open so that the US has the wherewithal to back things up, that can be done. So there's a question mark there. And my last point is a function of the US pivot or rebalance of late has been the opening of doors with what I call new friends, Myanmar, Vietnam in particular, which is great. And we certainly hope that the U.S. Within reason can push the relationship as far as it can go, obviously for mutual interest rather than sort of a love fest, but nevertheless, whatever it is. But having said that, like I mentioned at the very beginning, Singapore has a long-standing, deep, strong relationship with the U.S. So in the context of the US sort of paying, in their Southeast Asia policy, paying attention to new friends is great, but don't forget some of your old friends as well. On that note, I will end my remarks.
Thanks to both of you for very articulate presentations. The rebalance strategy was not intended to be a purely military strategy. But a variety of commentators have pointed out that it is taking on the appearance of being a largely military strategy because the non-military components of the approach have not been adequately funded. Now, this may change with TPP because I think in a sense, TPP should be seen as part of the rebalance strategy, and it's the major trade initiative of the Obama administration. But I wonder if the two of you could comment on the question from the perspective of Southeast Asia and your countries, or Malaysia and Singapore. Is the rebalance strategy too military in the way it's being implemented, and does that have negative consequences, or is that a reassuring factor behind the policy?
From Malaysia's perspective, I think the domestic perception of the rebalance is definitely more focused on the economic dimension because of TPP. Right. And the lack of broad-based support for the TPP. So that's become very controversial in Malaysia. And Malaysia's defense, Malaysia has strong defense ties, but there's always been very low-key, under the radar, and it has not been an issue that has affected Malaysia's perception, of the U.S. I think. And especially with the change from bases to places, that has so from Malaysia's perspective, there is it seems to be overwhelming. The TPP has made that rebalance appear more economic than the military dimension of it from the domestic perspectives.
Yeah, I think in my reading of the Singapore perspective is that the economic dimension was critical to blunt military, very obvious. I mean, the ships come in, you see them there.
Yeah.
You know, a very obvious military edge to it. You will recall, I think it was in June when our foreign minister was here to lobby quite heavily with regards to the TPP and TPA in particular. Of course, from Singapore's perspective, it is less the benefit that the TPP would bring for bilateral relations, because it's already, I mean, we've already got FTA and it's a very strong relationship, as I mentioned. But it was precisely for reasons that you pointed out, that there has to be a strong, unequivocal demonstration on the US part that the rebalance is a comprehensive strategy, not just a military strategy. Because if it was a military strategy, or perceived as such, then it would create, in fact, it already created problems as far as China's response, because China's reading of the pivot is that it's just a containment in another guise, right? So the TPP was critical in that regard. And underlying Singapore's concern and interest in that respect is also the sort of hard-nosed read that it is the TPP that would also be given to domestic pressures within Obama's own party, and actually not just in the US but other TPP countries as well, not Singapore but some others.
There have been references to the South China Sea, and you can't separate it from the rebalance strategy, because in a sense it's one of the problems the United States has to deal with in the context of the rebalance strategy. Malaysia is a claimant to islands in the South China Sea, while Singapore is not. I'd be interested in your respective perspectives on, is the United States handling the South China Sea issue adequate? Do the claimants feel we should be more forward-leaning in lending support to the claimants? Do the non-claimants feel that we are perhaps contributing too much to a rise of tensions in the South China Sea that's not in the regional interest? It's a broad issue, but I just want to tease out, if I can, any differences in perspective between claimants and non-claimants in terms of how the United States is playing its role.
As a claimant state, Malaysia has not received the sort of strident, aggressive measures that China has levied towards Vietnam and the Philippines. Right. It's only last year or so that the Chinese PLA Navy has sent some warships into Malaysian waters, and that has sparked Malaysian concern. And I think Malaysia was it's become less passive and more concerned about China, which is why it's actively working with the U.S. to build up its Coast Guard forces, and also more important, its Marine Corps. But at the same time, Malaysia also pursues also wants to enhance its security relationship with the U.S. With China, and has taken part in joint military sort of training with China as well. So it does see the U.S. as, for the time being, the American position that it does not take a position on sovereignty, but just wants to avoid any untoward incident that will result in open hostility. Malaysia is very, 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 it's completely, it agrees to that position, and that's why it feels any more proactive U.S. policies like the voicing of a joint patrol force, freedom of navigation patrol force in Spratlys, is not welcome by Malaysia or any other countries, perhaps with the exception of the Philippines, because then that will the equilibrium that the U.S. and China has kept will then be thrown out of joint. If U.S. pursues a more sort of a role that is seen to be more hostile to Chinese interests in the region.
Before I answer your question, I think actually I would like to ask sort of a follow-on. Do you sense that Malaysia's position has changed or is in the process of changing on the South China Sea?
It is in the process of changing. So for the first time in December, for the first time ever, a foreign minister has made statements in Parliament about Malaysia's concern on Chinese activities. Malaysia has never raised these concerns publicly. It's always been made privately. Because China has been going into land, the territories claimed by Malaysia, and planting Chinese flags. And then the Malaysians will call the Chinese, they'll take it off, and then they'll come back and put it back again. So there's this cat and mouse, thing that's going on, and Malaysia is beginning to deal, with the reality that it has never had to face before, because China has never, has never come into Malaysia, the waters claimed by Malaysia.
Well, from my sense, two things. Number one is, yep, you're absolutely right. Singapore is not a claimant. For us, one of the main issues at stake actually is back to ASEAN again, and this issue of ASEAN unity and coherence. That is not to say that ASEAN should be resolving this issue. I think it's been made quite clear by every member state in ASEAN that it is not in ASEAN's mandate to resolve this issue. It's something that has to be resolved by the claimants themselves. But ASEAN does have a role, and that role is to provide conducive conditions for dialogue towards some sort of resolution somewhere very far down the road. Right, so that is the sort of ASEAN perspective on this. As far as the U.S. position on the South China Sea, I think that the greater interest and presence of the U.S. Is something that is welcomed, but with a caveat, and that caveat is. In my view, with specific reference, if I may say so, with the Philippines. Vietnam and the Philippines are at the front line of this issue of the South China Sea dispute with China, as far as Southeast Asia is concerned, right? The Vietnamese, my sense is the Vietnamese have been a tad more sophisticated in dealing with the issue and the emerging major power dynamics around it than the Filipinos have been. And the concern here is that the US is locked in an alliance with the Philippines, which is still ambiguous on the specific concerns that the Filipinos have with regards to the South China Sea. But nevertheless, this issue of whether or not the Americans, whether deliberately or inadvertently, are emboldening the Filipinos to basically push the boundaries at the expense, I wouldn't say at the expense of ASEAN, but unilaterally, rather than trying to sort of discuss the issue with ASEAN. This is something that the members of ASEAN, including Singapore, I would imagine, are a bit concerned about. But that's, of course, my read of that situation.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll go to the audience. It predates the rebalance strategy, the pivot strategy, but it's certainly a part of it that the United States is encouraging Japan to take on a greater security role in East Asia and more broadly. This has not been fully welcomed by the South Korean government, which is also an ally of the United States because of historical memories. My question to the two of you is, to the extent that this is part of the rebalance strategy, do the countries in Southeast Asia and Malaysia and Singapore in particular feel that an expanded security role for Japan will contribute to the stability that I believe you feel is necessary for the region, or is it likely to have negative aspects?
From Malaysia's perspective, I think that Malaysia probably has no problems with Japan playing a more overt security role in helping to maintain stability in the South China Sea, because Malaysia has no negative historical memories with Japan, and it has as you know, Malaysia, if you remember, under Dr. Mahathir, had a look east policy, looking to Japan to help integrate the region economically under the East Asia grouping idea. And also, Malaysia has worked with the Japanese has been supportive of Japan's efforts to help patrol the Straits of Malacca, South China Sea in anti-piracy efforts. But I have not yet seen what. But if that cooperation, the enhanced cooperation between Japan and the U.S. were to provoke or were to evoke a very negative response from China, then perhaps Malaysia may rethink, how they can respond to Japan's role.
I think that question has touched on a conundrum that the region faces, not just with regards to Japan, but other powers, India, Australia. And the conundrum is this. On the one hand, the region would like other stakeholders to be involved in a constructive way. But on the other hand, as you recall, from the 70s, there was this perennial concern about among ASEAN states, which led to ZOPFAN, right? Aspiration, no doubt, but nevertheless, that the region would inadvertently become an arena for great power rivalry. So that's a no, but engagement of stakeholders outside the region is a yes. So how does ASEAN try to marry these two? What they have tried to do is to emphasize ASEAN centrality, and to manage that through this concept of ASEAN centrality, a very nebulous concept. But however nebulous, the underlying premise to ASEAN centrality is ASEAN unity. And that brings us back to my earlier point. Does ASEAN have is it united enough in terms of its position, in terms of its perspectives, to be able to play a role in managing the increased interests of major external parties in the South China Sea, because that is only going to increase. So I think there's a lot of pressure on ASEAN. Singapore is the newly appointed coordinator for ASEAN-China dialogue. But on the other hand, you have Laos, I think, coming in as the chair, and Philippines after that. So if I were a betting man, which I'm not, but if I were, I think those will be quite challenging years for the organization.
Yeah, we'll see that ASEAN coherence will not be a problem this year as with Malaysia as chair, and but despite the lack of unity in ASEAN, different positions taken by different ASEAN countries about the South China Sea, the difference between the claimant and non-claimant states, and also in the policies, the bilateral ties with the U.S. and China. Really, the U.S. have no other platform, no other forum, to interact with China and other regional powers, except for ASEAN. I mean, I see ASEAN not as strong in itself. It is, after all, a collection of weak states and one middle-range power, Indonesia. But ASEAN is by default the only regional organization that can get things done, or offer a platform for other powers to engage with one another. So as long as China and Japan are unable to work together, as long as they continue, to have the issues with one another, ASEAN by default will be the only organization that all the other powers, China, Japan, US, will have to work with.
Thank you. Now let's open the floor. We have some microphones here, and I would ask you to identify yourselves and, if possible, ask questions rather than make statements. I'll start here.
Thank you. I'm Tom Reckford with the Malaysia America Society and the Malaysia America Foundation. Pek Kuhn talked quite rightly about U.S.-Malaysia defense cooperation as being under the radar. But I wonder in this crowd if you could talk a bit more about just how much cooperation there is. And is it true that Malaysia will let U.S. Spy planes use Malaysian bases to cruise around the South China Sea?
It's under they've been under Najib, Mahathir had this very, very prickly relationship with the U.S., publicly difficult relationship with the U.S., but Najib carried on a very strong, close security relationship during his time as defense minister in Mahathir's administration. And there have now been many port visits, military training. They've got the Malaysia provides the facilities for U.S. naval visits as well as training, for the U.S. military as well. So, but it is not announced. If you read, the newspapers in Malaysia, they are not announced. It is so. In other words, it goes. It's sort of they carry on. But it is that the public is not aware of the range and the depth of that security cooperation, and we know that and what's one thing that's new that with the increased Chinese assertion in the South China Sea, Malaysia for the first time welcomed a port visit by a U.S. aircraft carrier in Sabah, off the coast of Sabah for the first time. And it is now engaged in talks about perhaps providing Labuan. Labuan is a port, it comes under federal control, not controlled by either Sabah or Sarawak. And they're still talking about whether the U.S. can base so-called spy planes, from the. It's not. I don't know. I've not followed these talks. I'm not aware. But if it does, and I wouldn't be surprised if it does, and it wouldn't be publicly publicized if that happens.
Okay. Yes. There's a question here.
Hi, Chen Weihua, China Daily. Yeah, the question is this whole thing about rebalance, the China-US dynamic in the region is being seen largely as the countries fighting for regional influence or dominance. The U.S., you could say, has been dominant, but China has been rising as a major trade partner with the countries in the region. So what would you like to see? Some have suggested a sharing power for U.S.-China in the region. How would you prescribe in the future for U.S.-China? Sharing the power. Obviously, no one is willing to be a subordinate at the time, at the moment. The other question is how ASEAN countries, Malaysia, Singapore, how the countries in the region want to actually taking advantage of this rivalry between China and the U.S. to benefit themselves. Thank you.
Malaysia, like all the other ASEAN countries, except those that are much closer to China, like Laos and Cambodia, they're comfortable with the U.S. handling of China because it sees the need to manage China's rise in a way that does not disrupt regional stability. And I think what has changed, is China's recent activities in the Spratly Islands that has caused a lot of concern. And so power sharing, China wants a new major relationship with the U.S. to reset the relationship into a new major power relationship. And as far as Malaysia is concerned, as long as there's doubts about China's intentions in South China Sea, that power sharing may not be as welcomed because, I don't think that if what is China, China has got to demonstrate that its intentions are peaceful. And even if China were to just carry out search and rescue operations from their new bases, from the new military, the airfield they've built, and if they were to position their a squadron of PLA there, but that activities in the claimed waters of Malaysia, Philippines, will be a source of concern. So as long as everybody is unsure about China's intention, the comfort they feel with the U.S. presence, they will see the U.S. as being necessary, to Malaysia. But at the same time, as I said, Malaysia has benefited very, very much from China's response to the rebalance, there's new economic initiatives in the region. And in Malaysia, you know that that's one thing that's new in the last cabinet reshuffle. Nigeria appointed a second Minister of International Trade and Industry, a senior MCA, Malaysian Chinese Association leader, who is entrusted with taking care of trade with China. So the dominant Chinese party in the government has been asked to take care and to grow the China trade, whereas the first, Minister Mustafa, the long-serving trade minister, will take care of the TPP. And then the other thing that Malaysia has benefited in a way from China's concern that China's wanting to woo Malaysia, is that it is the MCA is the first party in maritime Southeast Asia that the CCP has signed a party-to-party MOU. And so the CCP is engaging this Malaysian Chinese Association to facilitate its government-to-government ties and people-to-people ties, so that its infrastructural investments and trade investments will be facilitated and monitored by the MCA in Malaysia.
Professor Liu?
On regional dominance, I think from the region's perspective, we would rather not look at it in that way. That is unfortunate if the competition is couched as one of regional dominance, because of course that implies that the rest of the region is not only out of the equation, but very much unable to has no say or unable to influence things. It is a situation where we would like to see the cooperation quotient increase as part of the development of the region as a whole, and stability for the region as a whole. It is a situation where we think China can play a very constructive role, not just in terms of economic development, but in terms of politics and security in the region. And that is what we would like to see materialize. As far as the benefit is concerned, of course, states have taken advantage of this rivalry. I mean, you just look at the Mekong region for one. Both the Chinese and the Americans and the Japanese, for that matter, have their own initiatives that have benefited, to some extent, has exacerbated rivalry among the Mekong states. But nevertheless, I think that is at least one example of how some states have benefited. And it does appear, though, that the sort of, if I may use the phrase, mainland Southeast Asian states have benefited a bit more, if I may put it that way. Actually, I just want to make a quick point in response to the earlier question about Malaysia-US defense cooperation. I remember reading a report in, I think it's early 2013, after the first James Show incident. It was in the Utusan, when I think it was the Malaysian Navy Chief or Malaysian Chief of Armed Forces, I forget. He was asked about Malaysia's response. So he was very cool, as all Malaysian senior military officers are. He said that, it's not a big issue. If they had pushed very far into Malaysian territorial waters, our American friends would have told us anyway. So I thought that was very telling, of number one, that our American friends, and number two, we and our American friends are watching this very closely.
Okay. Yes?
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Jennifer Lee. I'm with Hong Kong Phoenix TV. My question is regarding President Xi and President Obama's meeting later this month, and this is going to be the first U.S. state visit of the President Xi. So I wonder, do you think what would be the significance of this meeting for the two countries and for the region, and what issues is going to be you will pay attention to particularly? I believe the territory dispute will be one of them, but you also mentioned that economic relationship is important for the two countries as well. So I would like to know your perspective on the meeting. And I wonder if Ambassador Ray can join the discussion as well. Do you think what would be each side's priority and what consensus is expected to reach this time? Thank you.
Okay, I'll start. I think, of course, you're right. For as far as Southeast Asia is concerned, we would like to see we'd like to see the South China Sea issue, territorial disputes issue, mentioned again in a positive, constructive way, if I can use that phrase again, constructive. Over and above that, I think that the economic issue will be on the table. I think that President Obama would want to go easy on the AIIB, or rather to not step back from the White House NSC's very strong position, knee-jerk almost position initially, but raise some issues, governance and all that sort of stuff. But nevertheless, not giving the impression that the Americans are dead set against the AIIB. And the third issue, I think President Obama needs to close the circle on to the extent that he can, is climate change. Because I think that is the one of a few outstanding issues that he really his presidency has emphasized.
Yeah, I do agree that, and I think from Malaysia's perspective, they would they want to see a very constructive and successful summit meeting, because when the U.S. and China gets on well, then the region benefits from that relationship. But I think from Malaysia's perspective, because of its own economic problems that the country is facing, they would like to see the meeting producing some kind of specific and concrete measures whereby U.S. and China will work together to deal with this current financial crisis that China is going through, economic transformation that China is going through, and so that is probably the one item that the Malaysia will focus on, because all it wants to, because Nigeria really needs to strengthen growth again in order for him to maintain his legitimacy among the domestic population.
I'll just comment very briefly. Proper management of United States relations with China is an integral part of the rebalance strategy, as I understand it. It's clear that rivalry between China as a rising power and the United States as the established, shall we say, security balancer in East Asia has been increasing. But at the same time, the mechanisms for discussing issues between China and the United States from the top level on down are the best they've ever been. When I was ambassador in China, I would be lucky if I could get a cabinet minister to come to have a discussion. And there were no presidential exchanges between China and the United States during the 4 years that I was in Beijing. Now these types of meetings are taking place on a regular basis, multiple times a year in many cases. And I think that's a very important development, because if you can't communicate, you can't solve problems. And from that standpoint, I think the visit by President Xi offers an opportunity at a time when there have been a variety of tensions associated with South China Sea or the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank or other questions that need to be addressed at the highest level. go back to the rear there.
Hi, I'm Prashant from the Diplomat magazine. I have two quick questions. So first on Malaysia, Pekun, you mentioned that despite Najib's domestic troubles, it was unlikely to, I guess, significantly affect the management of the East Asia Summit and some of the other multilateral forums that Malaysia is going to be hosting. But I was wondering if it's your impression or you've heard anything about some of the more proactive measures that Najib was trying to push initially about, Malaysia as a middle power. Has that been affected to a certain degree? The amount of leverage and latitude that he has to advance Malaysia more proactively as a power in Southeast Asia or the Asia Pacific more broadly, to the extent that that vision was actually realizable in the first place. And then for both of you, I'm wondering if you could comment on Indonesia and the question of ASEAN centrality, because there's been this perception that, among some people at least, that Indonesia has lost a lot of interest in ASEAN under Jokowi. And I realize it's all relative and, it's still very early on. But to what extent does this concern you, and what does this mean for ASEAN, and what would both countries, having their own considerations and concerns about Indonesia historically, where would they want Indonesia to be on this question? Thanks.
For Malaysia's, Najib's objective of making Malaysia middle power in the region, that has received a lot less play in the country compared to his articulation of making Malaysia a high-income nation. I think that economic objective for him is the first priority, which is why he is pursuing, doggedly pursuing the TPP despite the domestic opposition to it. And I say that I am quite certain that he will get it through because because Najib has said that the TPP does not require a parliamentary vote, only cabinet approval. And now that he's sacked his number two, who was the strongest critic of the TPP, the deputy prime minister, and 4 other cabinet ministers who are not fond of the TPP, so he now has a compliant cabinet that can push through the TPP. And also, even if he were to allow Parliament and a parliamentary vote on the TPP, he will get the votes. He's got enough votes. UMNO has enough votes in Parliament, and the coalition has enough votes. So middle power. It's I think that with then that he sees it as it being achieved in tandem with Malaysia being a high income nation. I think Malaysia is, I do agree with you that everybody in the region is concerned about the low profile, that the more passive policy that Jokowi has showed towards ASEAN, and Jokowi has proved so far to be more a domestic president than he is a foreign policy president. And and perhaps his visit to the US and if he were to establish a warm personal relationship with Obama, it may, he may be motivated, to play probably a stronger role in support of joint Indonesian-US interests in the region. So, but Jokowi has yet to emerge as a foreign policy president.
I would just add a few things to what Pek Kun said. The first one, with regards to the Malaysia as a middle power, I think one thing we need to bear in mind that the intellectual impetus or the brains behind this, brains behind Najib's foreign policy are the same people who are now stuck in this whole 1MDB crisis or scandal or whatever you want to call it. So I think they are a bit preoccupied to sort of flesh out what exactly Malaysian middle powerdom is going to be in the coming months and years. On Jokowi, I totally agree. We're still trying to figure out what Jokowi's foreign policy is. But having said that, obviously we want Indonesia to be on site with ASEAN. I think this whole logic about, or this whole mantra about Indonesia being first among equals still stands. But what would be good is to see Indonesia look beyond just the bells and whistles and actually come up with a substantive, coherent policy which they are prepared to invest the wherewithal to follow through on it. That would be good, helpful at least.
Let me go over here.
Yes, Mike Anderson with the Malaysia America Foundation and Society. With the clock ticking on the Obama administration, is there time for any new initiatives in terms of the rebalance to make it truly more comprehensive? Anything that could be done, say, in environment, climate change, educational exchange, people-to-people ties, those kinds of softer topics that have really not gotten much attention since the initiative came up?
Perhaps I'll just take up this. I think I'll leave to Ambassador Roy to talk about what else can be added to the.
I'm the
to
moderator
rebalance.
here. I'll focus on you all.
So I don't know what's in the U.S. mind, about what can be added. But from Malaysia's perspective, I think the different specifics of the rebalance policy. They don't seem to be asking the U.S. to do anything more. But I think what is important for Malaysia, which I'd like to touch on, is the people-to-people exchanges. Compared to China, anyway, there's a lot more. Malaysia is doing a lot more with the U.S. in its exchanges. The Waisili program, the educational programs, the Fulbright programs in the schools at the different levels, and that exchanges with the U.S. covers the Malay and non-Malay population. Whereas if you look at the exchanges to China, it is mainly ethnic Chinese. Who are going over to China to study there, and they're more ethnic Chinese Malaysians who are working and studying in China. So it has a more balanced kind of a racial mix in the people-to-people educational exchanges that Malaysia has with the U.S. But one thing I'd like to say here is that apart from the rebalance, the Najib has got to deal with the Muslim population in Malaysia, and that Muslim population, like that in Indonesia, are very, very sensitive to U.S. policies in the Middle East. And Najib is aware that the popular support, there isn't that high, there isn't that robust support for the U.S. among the Muslim population. He's ahead of the Malay base, but he has tried, and so by the last couple of years, with Iran rapprochement, and also with the ISIL threat that the Malay population itself feels, they have to deal with, that sensitivity towards the U.S. Role in the Middle East is not as palpable as it was. At the same time, Najib has tried to he has burnished his Muslim credentials, because he's very, very pro-US, but he has balanced it with projecting himself domestically as the protector of Malay rights and Malay and Islam. So he's introduced the first country in the world as a leader. He has introduced a so-called Sharia index in Malaysia, which is not quite, moving Malaysia towards hudud or more kind of a muscular or hardline from Islam, but to make Islam a more lived experience, in many, many areas of Malaysian life. So in that sense, Najib is careful to be seen not to be as a pro-Western, pro-US figure, but also somebody who is very, very much a leader of a Muslim majority state.
More scholarships, research funding, ratify UNCLOS,
Right.
and make good on expressions of support for a larger Asian voice in the WTO, IMF, etc.
Very specific.
Yeah.
Yes, over here.
Mike Massetic, PBS Online NewsHour for Mr. Lowe. You talked about future Singapore leaders. Could you put on your pundit hat and talk about not only the election coming up in a couple of weeks, but how you see domestic politics evolving in Singapore. Will there be a more vibrant two-party or multi-party system?
I left my pundit hat at home. I think it will be much more complex, complicated. I think you have, as you rightly point out, we are in the throes of a very interesting campaign. I expect some surprises to be thrown up. If I may sort of use that cliche, flog that dead horse again, it's the new norm. It's the new normal now in Singapore politics. And I think on the one hand, the PAP will have to learn to live with it. On the other hand, the opposition, which will increase its say and influence, will have to learn how to use it constructively. So I think at this point in time, my sense is there's quite a bit of sympathy for the opposition. They might well increase the number of seats in Parliament on from September 12th onwards, or whenever Parliament sits. Once they, as we saw over the last 5 years, once they come into power, their performance will be under very heavy scrutiny. So I think Singapore is in for a very interesting time as far as domestic politics is concerned.
Mm-hmm. Yes?
Hello, Leroy Miller, American University. I wanted to come back to the question that you'd raised about, is ASEAN united enough? And I'm wondering what you see as the potential for cohesion in ASEAN over the next 3 to 10 years in terms of the consciousness of identification with ASEAN. I don't know whether we would call it ASEANists or Southeast Asians or simply a shared community. So both on a policy maker level and also on a political level. Because it really appears that the problem is hanging together or hanging separately in terms of having your own voice and driving your own future. The second question that I have is, what could a possible U.S. role be in furthering the cohesion of ASEAN? Because it seems that U.S. policy now is very bilateral and is not, as it did in the early years of European unification, seeking to drive a more cohesive Southeast Asia.
Just taking on the question, then the ASEAN unity, identity. I mean, as you know, the ASEAN has 3 pillars. There's the security political pillar, there's the economic pillar, and the social cultural pillar. And of course, the economic pillar is the strongest. Security pillar is, it's coming along, but the weakest is the People's ASEAN, this social security pillar. But ASEAN, I think ASEAN is not that concerned about building, a true an ASEAN identity or a sense of belonging to ASEAN, because they are aware that all these countries, the individual ASEAN members, are so different. They're racially fragmented, they're so fragmented, culturally fragmented, and every nation in ASEAN is still dealing with nation building. So they are not finished with the task of nation building. If you can't have cohesive nations, you cannot have a cohesive ASEAN. So they're aware of it. So for them, it's not a matter of concern. They talk about the rhetoric of building a people's ASEAN. When Malaysia's theme is building a people-centered ASEAN, Brunei's theme was building a people-centered ASEAN, but they're not getting there. But they talk about it, and what they want to do is have an ASEAN that will prevent conflicts from breaking out between the countries. That's what ASEAN is for, is to maintain inter-ASEAN peace and stability. And so, and that it is a process. They see it as a long-term process, and ultimately, when the national, when national, so the domestic national building is stronger, then they can deal more with this other bigger issue of regional identity. And from what can the U.S. do to promote this identity? U.S. has done a lot more than the ASEAN Secretariat have done, to promote the sense of ASEAN awareness, starting with the intellectuals and the young leaders. So the U.S. have created a multilateral affairs office 4 or 5 years ago to deal with ASEAN mainly, and so it is coordinating its with its bilateral policies, also together in a multilaterally to do with ASEAN. And the MLA, in the Fulbright programs and other school programs, and Obama's initiative announced last year, the young YSEALI, the Young Southeast Asia Leadership Initiative. It's the only program I see that the Chinese and the Japanese have that too, but the U.S. have been extremely careful and strategic in bringing together young leaders and academics, policy, intellectuals, to the U.S. on this this ASEAN-centered program. So they come as ASEAN, and they interact as ASEAN participants. And it's the only program that I see where this ASEAN-ness or the sense of ASEAN is being instilled or being inculcated with the next generation of ASEAN leaders and the up-and-coming, policy, oriented leaders in the country. So for that, it's important.
I think that when I look at ASEAN, one thing that I notice is the association seems to lack the caliber of leadership that it used to have. By leadership, I mean in the individual countries. I mean, in the past, you had Indonesia, Suharto, Adam Malik, Ali Alatas. You had Ghazali, Shafi, you had Lee Kuan Yew, Tanat, Prem. You could go on. Regional statesmen, and you compare that lot with the list today. I think, with all due respect to the present lot of foreign policy leadership, it's a bit pales in comparison. That's one. Second is I think ASEAN still struggles with this sort of engaging the grassroots. So they have a problem with a generation that has passed and they haven't replaced that generation effectively, and they're also having a problem with a generation that is to come. That is to say that ASEAN has, the usual criticism is so elitist, it hasn't really put in enough effort sort of working at a grassroots level, which I think to some extent is true, although it varies in different countries. I think in Singapore it's quite bad, the state in Singapore. As far as what the US can do, one particular issue, just to add on to what Pekun has said, as with regards to the South China Sea, for example, we talked about it earlier. The US is improving relations with Vietnam, with the Philippines, with Malaysia. These are claimant states. Can the US do something about getting the claimant states to sort of cooperate among themselves in terms of their own disputes? Because one thing we need to be mindful of, the South China Sea is not a China-ASEAN dispute. There's a tendency for us to think about it that way. It's not, right? It's within ASEAN itself. There are a lot of problems among the claimants, And in the case of all the ASEAN, Southeast Asian claimants, the US has sort of increased its influence and presence. So, you could make use of that.
We have time for one last question. Yes.
Gil Rosman, the ASEAN Forum. I get the sense that there's a concern that the Philippines could be the tail that wags the dog. And so my question really is about, do Japan and the United States coordinate well in dealing with Southeast Asia and the countries you're discussing? Or does Japan seek a more aggressive posture, more supportive of the Philippines, or in other ways stand for more challenging China more directly? In other words, what is the correct balance? And the United States and Japan, and maybe you want to add Australia or others, do we work together to achieve that balance, or is there a division in handling these challenges?
Okay, I'll take a stab at that. I think, again, as far as ASEAN is concerned, they would like to see it take place in the context of an ASEAN mechanism. But specific to Japan, I think Japan has basically on its own improved relations with key Southeast Asian states. And by key, I mean Vietnam and the Philippines, right, for obvious reasons. But Japan is also making its presence felt in the region more generally with significantly increased infrastructure spending, which is interesting because that was something that had tapered off substantially over the years, and there was no indication that it was going to increase, certainly not in tandem with the increase in Chinese investments, but that has changed over the last year. So I think that Southeast Asia features independently, quite prominently in Prime Minister Abe's foreign policy, and he's approaching that outside of the US-Japan alliance relationship. Of course, that one is probably even more important for him, but specific to Southeast Asia, it is he's directly interested in the region.
Yeah, and I see that Japan's engagement of Southeast Asia is more bilateral than it is multilateral. It has an ASEAN policy, but it's a very, it's not a very clear, what Japan ASEAN policy is like. So, but bilaterally, you can see Japan working closer with Vietnam and the Philippines, providing, helping to build their naval capacity. And in that way, Japan's role, and it's not seen to be in any way by the ASEAN countries to be threatening. The countries are concerned to that China, that the relationship with China stays on even keel. So one thing I'd like to say, though, just if I may make this comment about, Najib is by far the leader that will continue to provide strong support for the U.S. There are no other leaders in Malaysia that will be able to keep that relationship on the same level as Najib. If you look around, if any of the opposition, nobody in PAS or the DAP, the PAS and DAP are adamantly opposed to the TPP. And the U.S. have very little sense of what the past is like. The U.S. have done very little to court leaders from the opposition. And Anwar today is now locked away, and I think Anwar's political future is over. So maybe if you look at this man with strong, this potential repression of opposition to him, for the U.S. perspective, it's a good story because Najib is likely to bring the BN to its 14th electoral victory. He will lead the coalition government to another victory. And there's nobody in UMNO that's strong enough to displace him, and that's good news for the U.S.
Thank you for joining us this morning, and please join me in thanking our two speakers.
Joe, when did you come back? When is the election?
Election is on Friday.
Friday.
I'm going back today.
Are you leaving for the election?
No, not for election. I'll be flying back on the day of polling, polling day.